Pablo Escobar. The name alone conjures images of drug planes, hidden billions, and a life dripping in blood and gold. But what if I told you the richest gangster in history wasn't Colombian and wasn't even a man? The deadliest drug empire in history wasn't built in jungles or by cartels, it was built in palaces and ruled by a queen. The true queenpin of global crime was none other than Queen Victoria, who turned empire into the greatest cartel the world has ever seen. Welcome to Luxury Buzz, your go-to channel for exploring the world's most extravagant assets, ultra-wealthy lifestyles, and exclusive luxury tech. If you love jaw-dropping luxury, hit subscribe, like this video, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on pure opulence. The British opium trade, drugs, tea, and empire. The story begins not with opium, but with tea. By the 18th and early 19th centuries, Britain was hooked on tea imported from China. The problem? China didn't want British goods in return. The result was a crippling trade imbalance. Silver was flowing out of Britain in vast quantities just to keep the tea kettles boiling in London. The solution was as cynical as it was brilliant. Sell the Chinese a drug they couldn't resist. That drug was opium, cultivated on a massive scale in British-ruled India by the East India Company. Cheap to grow, easy to transport, and ferociously addictive, opium became the perfect trade weapon. And when Queen Victoria ascended the throne in 1837, Britain's narcotics exports to China skyrocketed. By the late 1830s, opium wasn't just another commodity, it was the backbone of British imperial finance. By the 1840s, opium made up between 15 to 20% of Britain's annual revenue. That's right, up to a fifth of the empire's income came directly from drug money. No cartel in history has ever had such a stranglehold on a nation's economy. But there was a catch. Opium was illegal in China. The Qing dynasty knew the devastation it was wreaking on its people. Chinese Emperor Dao Guang dispatched Commissioner Lin Zexu, who in 1839 launched an anti-opium crusade, seizing and publicly destroying over 1,000 tons of British opium at Human. China appealed to Queen Victoria herself, sending letters that begged her to stop poisoning their population. She never replied. Instead, Britain sent gunboats. Thus began the First Opium War, 1839 to 1842. Britain's industrial age firepower smashed Chinese defenses. The result? The humiliating Treaty of Nanking, which forced China not only to reopen the opium trade, but also to hand over the jewel of Hong Kong as a permanent British colony. The pattern was set. Any resistance to the drug trade would be met with violence. When China resisted again in the Second Opium War, 1856 to 1860, Britain doubled down, forcing even more humiliating concessions. Under Queen Victoria, narcotics became an official instrument of empire. Unlike Escobar, she never had to hide her role because she was the law, financing vast wealth and expansion. What happens when a monarch controls the world's biggest drug racket? She doesn't bury money in fields, she builds an empire. Opium revenue didn't just fatten Britain's coffers, it financed the very machinery of colonialism. In India, taxes from opium were the second largest source of government income after land taxes. This money paid for soldiers, railways, and administrative systems that expanded British control even further. By 1870, Britain wasn't just rich, it was the world's largest economy, commanding a quarter of global trade. And opium was a pillar of that dominance. Escobar laundered his money through shell companies. Queen Victoria laundered hers through the British Treasury. And while modern drug lords lived in constant fear, Victoria's wealth was untouchable. It was not dirty money. It was the very foundation of Britain's global supremacy. Opulence fit for a queenpin. So, how did the richest drug lord in history live? Not in secret jungle compounds or underground tunnels, but in palaces. Queen Victoria was the first monarch to make Buckingham Palace her official residence. She moved in as a teenager in 1837, transforming it into a hub of imperial power and high society spectacle. Inside its 775 rooms, she hosted glittering banquets, operas, and balls, illuminated by chandeliers dripping with crystal and walls lined with treasures looted or traded from every corner of the empire. Every glittering ballroom, every crystal chandelier shimmered with the wealth of an empire bankrolled by narcotics. Her royal collection grew fat with riches from abroad. After Britain defeated the Sikh Empire in 1849, Victoria was presented with the legendary Koh-i-Noor diamond, a 105-carat gem that became part of the crown jewels. By the late 19th century, the crown jewels contained over 23,000 gemstones. A fortune in diamonds, sapphires, and rubies adorned her crowns and scepters, dazzling symbols of a monarchy bankrolled by narcotics. While addicts in Canton wasted away in opium dens, Queen Victoria wore the gem proudly at state banquets, its brilliance lit by drug-financed chandeliers. Beyond Buckingham, Victoria enjoyed Windsor Castle, Balmoral Castle in Scotland, and Osborne House, each a retreat filled with opulent furnishings, art, and luxuries. Even public spectacles reflected this wealth. The Great Exhibition of 1851, housed in the Crystal Palace, was essentially a global showcase of Britain's imperial riches. Her Golden Jubilee in 1887 and Diamond Jubilee in 1897 saw massive parades, fireworks, and international tributes. A monarch celebrating not just longevity, but the success of her empire's financial foundation. And in a final ironic twist, Victoria herself occasionally consumed the very drugs her empire pushed. She was known to use laudanum, a tincture of opium, for pain relief, and experimented with early cocaine-infused tonics. Unlike street addicts in Canton, her indulgences were seen as fashionable medicine, outshining Pablo Escobar and El Chapo. Now, let's stack the numbers. Pablo Escobar at his peak was worth around $30 billion in the early 1990s, perhaps $70 to $80 billion in today's money. His Medellin cartel controlled most of the world's cocaine trade, but his fortune was fragile. He lived under constant siege, hiding from police, bribing officials, and burying cash in Colombian soil. He died in a shootout at 44. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, head of the Sinaloa cartel, peaked at around $1 billion. His power came with endless prison escapes, betrayals, and finally a lifetime sentence in a U.S. supermax prison. Impressive? Yes, but compared to Queen Victoria, these men were amateurs. The British Empire's global economy in the 19th century was valued in the hundreds of billions in today's terms. By 1914, Britain's overseas assets alone were worth £4 billion, equivalent to hundreds of billions of dollars today. The opium trade, responsible for up to 20% of state revenue, generated sums that dwarfed anything Escobar could smuggle in duffel bags. Most importantly, Victoria didn't just own drug money. She controlled armies, navies, and governments. Escobar had to fight the state. Victoria was the state. Escobar's legacy is one of terror, assassinations, and a bloody rooftop death. El Chapo's story is one of tunnels and prisons. Queen Victoria's story, a 63-year reign, global domination, and a peaceful death surrounded by her family, followed by a lavish state funeral. The biggest difference? Escobar and Guzman are remembered as criminals. Victoria is remembered as a beloved monarch. History books call her the grandmother of Europe, not the godmother of the opium trade. Legacy of the queenpin. The tale of Queen Victoria's opium empire forces us to rethink the line between legitimacy and crime. By today's standards, Britain's 19th century drug trade was nothing less than state-sponsored narcotics trafficking. It enriched one nation while devastating another, fueling addiction and despair on a massive scale. But because it wore the cloak of empire and monarchy, it wasn't condemned as criminal. It was celebrated as progress. So next time you hear the name Escobar, remember this. The greatest drug empire wasn't hidden in jungles. It glittered in palaces. And its riches still sparkle today in Britain's jewels, castles, and royal pageantry. The legacy of the world's richest drug lord in history. If this deep dive into the richest drug lord of all time has captivated your imagination, please subscribe, like, and share this video. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.